Obviously with archery, it's all about consistency, and execution is extremely important. So I'm going to show you 3 ways that I have found to shoot a thumb release with consistency, which ultimately leads to accuracy downrange. Regardless of the method that we use to activate our release properly, there's several key things that we can do to keep consistency in our shot with a thumb button release. One of those is being where the release actually sits in your hand and against your fingers, and another one being where the thumb actually sits on the thumb barrel of the release as well. You want the release in the flat grooves of your fingers, not too far out on the tip of your fingers and not too deep in the release either. You want it right in between, because if it's too far out on your fingers, you lack control and you can even let the release slip through your fingers and out of your hand. But too deep in the release and too far into those knuckles like that, and it's really hard to get the transfer of pressure between the release to transfer that pressure into your thumb against the trigger. Now the same thing can be said for the thumb position on the trigger. If we've got it too close to the tip of our finger, then we lack control, we lack consistency. It's harder to apply the same amount of pressure from the tip of our finger, and it's much easier to punch or force the release when we don't want to, right? If we get too deep on the thumb trigger, it's not quite as bad as if we have our fingers really deep on the release handle, but it can also be hard to replicate the consistency of the pressure that we're putting on the thumb barrel. So I like to find a nice place in between. I wrap my thumb so that the pad of my thumb is wrapped completely around the thumb barrel itself. That way, when I'm pulling through my shot or I'm going through the motions with these different methods to execute the shot, the thumb button is pulling into my thumb and there's no way it can slip or slide off of my thumb. This gives me the most consistency in my shot, and it will give you the most consistency as well. The first method I'm going to show you is relatively simple, and it just basically involves a transfer of pressure between the release, okay? So with this method, basically what's going to happen is when you draw back and you get into anchor and you wrap your thumb on the trigger, instead of just pulling or simply squeezing your thumb, what you're actually going to do is slowly squeeze that outside finger. So in this case, with this Ultra View thumb button release, I've got it as a 3 finger, and I set my thumb and I'm just slowly squeezing my ring finger until it pulls enough pressure from the thumb barrel into my thumb for it to go off. So we have to think about the release itself. It is pressure on the thumb button for it to fire, but to activate it with this method, we're just squeezing this outside finger, and that's causing the pressure to transfer across the release and rotate that release so that the thumb barrel goes into my thumb and slowly increases pressure until it fires. It's important to not use this as a trigger, as fire now, but just use it as a slow, consistent build of pressure across the release until the release fires. Using this method makes it much more difficult to punch or force the shot on your release, especially if you've already got that bad habit ingrained into shooting a thumb button. It's also important to note with this method, you're actually not going to see the release move when you're going through this transfer of pressure, but you're going to feel it in the shot. You're going to feel the pressure building on that outside finger, and you're going to feel the pressure transferring and building against the thumb barrel on your thumb on the trigger. Align your sight first and then slowly increase pressure on your outside finger on the release until the thumb button pushes against your thumb enough for it to fire. Your focus will be on your outside finger slowly building pressure on the release handle, but you must be able to feel that pressure transferred into your thumb in order for this to work. Smooth, steady, and consistent pressure is key. So the next method I'm going to show you is definitely one of my favorites, but it can also be just a little bit tricky to learn. You might not be able to pick it up right away, but I have found it provides a really smooth and consistent release, and it's very, very comfortable once you get this down. I actually made a video on this method several years ago, and I'll link that here in this video, but I will highlight it here as well. With this method, as you set your fingers into the release, you will almost but not quite make a fist with your hand. You're not clenching your hand as tight as it can possibly be, but you're not super flat and relaxed in your hand quite yet at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our hand tensed up almost like a fist, right? We'll draw back, we'll anchor and apply our finger on the trigger and aim, and then what we actually do is we stretch our hand from the fist to a flat position. Now it's important to note we're not sliding our fingers off of the release, we're simply just stretching our hand out, and what that does, as we stretch our hand, that thumb barrel is building pressure against our thumb, or it's sliding across our thumb. So once we lock our thumb in position and we stretch our hand, then it is triggering that release. So I found this to be a super consistent method because it's easy when you're tense to let up on the pressure rather than actually building pressure when you're in a pressured scenario. I really like this method with the UltraView thumb button release. Just the way that the handle fits in your hand and the hook position and the length of the head, it really provides a comfortable platform to use this method of execution for a thumb release, though you can use this obviously with any thumb release out there. So when you're using this method, it's important when you're stretching out your hand that you're picking up that slack by slowly building a little bit of back tension in your shot. This is done very naturally, so you shouldn't have to think about it. But if you don't do it and you're really relaxed up here and you stretch out your hand, you could potentially come up out of the valley of your shot and collapse on the shot. So it would not be very comfortable for you. The last method I'm going to show you is actually what I have found to be one of the most accurate ways to shoot a thumb button release, but only if you can control it. It only involves slowly squeezing your thumb on the trigger until it fires. No release rotation, no pushing, pulling, no relaxation, just a slow, steady squeeze on the trigger. This is very, very, very difficult to control, especially in a pressured situation. You really just have to test this out for yourself and see if you like shooting this way. Using a release like the Stan Onyx clicker can be very, very helpful when utilizing this method. What Stan has done with their Onyx clicker release is basically created a two-stage trigger, just like what has been done for years on rifles and pistols in the firearm sector. So basically what it does is it adds a step in your shot so that you can stay conscious in the release itself. Without that click, it can be easy for your mind to associate pin on the target, thumb on the trigger with the firing of the bow, right? With the two-stage trigger, this triggers in your mind that you've got to have your pin on the target, your thumb on the trigger, and you've got to work to that click before your brain knows that the release is going to fire. So it forces you to have that thought in your head of I've got to work to the click before I can squeeze through my shot and get that execution to go off. So I do highly recommend this release for this method, but of course it can be used with any release as well. Now, just like the first two methods that I show you, it's very important that once you start this process, it's got to be very smooth and consistent. It's very easy to rush through this execution method, and so with any release, just try to slowly build that pressure as slow and smooth and steady as possible until it fires. Now keep in mind, regardless of the method that you use and regardless of the movement that you use to fire your release, it is so extremely important to be able to feel that pressure increase on the actual trigger on your thumb for it to fire. If you're going through all these different methods, complicating things and focusing on your finger twisting or your hand stretching, but you're not actually feeling the pressure build on your thumb smoothly and consistently, the release will not fire. You've got to be able to feel that smooth, consistent pressure on the trigger in order for it to fire, regardless of the method that you use. To help others that may be watching this video, please comment below the method that you have found to be most consistent and accurate while shooting a thumb button release. It may not even be one of the three methods that I talked about in this video, but it could be very helpful to some of the other archers that are watching and reading some of the comments. And if you found this video helpful, please let me know. I love archery, I love bow hunting. I've been fortunate enough to learn a lot, and I'm still learning every single day. But if you guys want to see more content like this, I'd love to know. So please comment below. The last thing I want to mention is none of these methods are my own. These methods of firing a thumb button release have been around for a long time and have been used by many professional archers and bow hunters for many years. I have just simply found them to be very consistent and accurate for myself, and I wanted to share them with you guys as well in case you had never heard of them before. So I encourage you all to try them out for yourself, spend some time with each method, and really determine what is most comfortable to you, what is most consistent and repeatable for you, because ultimately that will give you the most accuracy. Thank you guys for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.